Hey Jared, how's it going?
Hey Rajiv, good morning. It's going good. It's always pretty busy around here, but that's how I like it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know we've been planning this for a while now, but glad to be here with you today. It's been what, 5, 6 years since you started, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, no, this is starting my sixth year in August here, so it's been a
That's
while.
that's quite a journey, and that's one of the reasons I want to really talk to you because it's been my privilege to kind of see your trajectory over those last few years. It's been very impressive, and especially the way that you moved from kind of pure software development into the innovation space. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with a bit of audience kind of background for the audience that sets their stage and kind of what you were doing prior to Informulate, and we'll talk about what you did do and kind of where you are today. And I think
Yeah,
that journey is very useful for a lot of folks that are doing software development but haven't really figured out or are thinking about making that transition into innovation. So let's start there.
yeah,
What was your background prior to Informulate?
yeah, sure. So my background has been in, web development. So I've been a web developer for going on like 12 years. I mean, if you include the time I spent in Formulate, but I was really interested in just computers and nerdy stuff from a young age. But I was exposed to some really basic like web development in high school, like a high school class. It was like 2001, 2002, and it was just like a week-long project. That's all it was. It was really basic. We built like a simple website using Notepad.exe, on Windows and Internet Explorer. And I was just really interested in like learning more. I'm like, this is cool. It was just one of those things that I was just like really interested in, and like I'm like, what are all the other HTML tags that we didn't learn this week? What is CSS? What does that even do? What is JavaScript? So I spent an entire summer almost just on the internet learning all that stuff, just having fun building websites. And so I'm like, you know what? This is what I want to do. This is what I want to do for a career. So I went to school for computer science, but I dropped out as soon as I landed a job because school was not the same thing as building websites. I just love building. I love coding. So I landed a job, and I spent the next 8 years writing code, learning web development, distributed systems, DevOps. I mean, the cool thing about just working in technologies, there's always something else you can learn. There's always something related, to what you're working on that you can learn. There's always something to there's always like a next level, right? And so I'm still here. I'm still trying to learn. So
Yeah, no, that's definitely comes across. It's really cool because I know you from the last few years and you always picking up new technologies, sometimes things that you've never worked with before, kind of in a matter of a few weeks. So that energy definitely comes across. But let's talk about your time here as well. I think you were a senior architect developer or senior developer architect at the time you joined us, and
mhm.
share a little bit with the audience about how that's changed over the last 5 years.
So I remember I remember when you interviewed me, right? And I did a technical interview, um, and it was you and Jesus doing the interview, and I did pretty well on the technical interview. I came in, it was all stuff I knew, and I hit the interview and I knew I did well. But you asked me one question that like I just wasn't prepared for, and I kind of felt bad afterwards. But you're like, hey, what do you want to do? Like, what's your growth trajectory? Like where do you want to be? Do you want to be like a technical architect, or do you want to, kind of do tech lead type stuff? Like manage projects and help run things at a higher level. And I was just totally like unprepared for that question. I'm like, man, like I should know this. I should know like where I want to go. Um, but I just have I learned something a while back, and that is like always make a decision that makes you slightly uncomfortable. Like that's usually the thing. That's usually the path that's going to be the highest growth. You're going to get the best return if you do the thing that makes you slightly uncomfortable, right? And so, I'm not naturally like a people person. I'm not naturally like a manager type, but I'm like, I'm going to be the tech lead. I'm going to go the tech lead path, right? Um, and I remember I thought at the time, I did I did some mentoring with junior developers. I've been working in web development for a long time. So I had some opportunities to mentor junior developers and kind of, organize projects a little bit. But I was just totally unprepared for the the learning that was to come at Informulate. And so, it was just a deep dive into project management, which I thought I knew, but I didn't. So I got to learn actually how to manage a project, how to manage timeline, budget, scope, quality, how to interface with clients and gather requirements. There's a lot I could go to there. But, and I also learned a lot about agile methodology. So I was trying to learn like how do we manage a team? So real hands-on experience with, running sprints, doing backlog grooming. So I eventually went and got my Scrum Master certification so that I could, learn a little bit more about how it's actually done. And so, yeah, that's been my experience for the past 5 years, is really just working as a Scrum Master. But then I guess more to your question about innovation, that was something that I was always kind of curious about when I first started, was like the innovation angle, because I kept hearing it here and there. I was never really fully involved in it. But Rajiv, you mentioned like from somebody coming from a web developer to innovation, like what's that path to being an innovation lead? I would say like that path is you have to be interested in business, and so I kind of developed that on the side. Like I'm like, all of the tools that we use, iPhones, Apple computers, even web tools, Dropbox, you've got Google Docs, you're using stuff every day. Somebody had to go out and build that, right? That's a business. Somebody had to, and what honestly got me interested in that aspect of it was the project management piece. Because as a developer, I'm always thinking about, hey, how can we make this code beautiful and like just work well together? I'm really focused on like architecting an excellent technical solution. But then bam, you slap on this additional requirement. Oh, and by the way, do it in this timeline and budget. And it's just like, oh, what? But then you're like, why do I have to have these constraints? It seems kind of artificial, but that's what everybody operates in. Everybody has a fixed amount of money. There's not an infinite budget for these projects. And so like, how do you build a product, right? You have to have a business. Like, how do businesses work? So I think, being really interested in how a business works is the key to bridging that gap between, maybe a developer to a tech lead, to innovation lead, because that's essentially what innovation methodology is all about. It's all about, looking at risks to the business model and, just running little experiments to de-risk things and basically build the right product first. Because, you don't have enough money to go off and build the wrong product, So yeah, I know I kind of went on there, but that's basically it.
The only thing I would disagree with there is I think you are a people person. I think the empathy that you have and how you really make a connection with, understanding users' needs and really looking at, what solves their problem was something that, in my opinion, came pretty naturally to you. That said, the other thing that really struck me was how you basically look at each level and you look at the next level and you're like, what do I do to go up one level? And then we have that conversation and you grab that opportunity with both hands. Let's talk specifically about some of those opportunities. So you worked on quite a few projects in the years that you've been here. Share a little bit about some of the cooler projects that you worked on so far.
Yeah, so I guess the cool thing about working here is we've got a lot of like long-term engagements, which was nice to come in and we have these projects that have been going on for a long time. We have good relationships with our clients. So, one of the first projects I was on was a large university wellness program. That was a fun project because, it had a lot of pieces to it. So, it was challenging for me when I first started. That's kind of where I cut my teeth on tech lead stuff. But it was also where I cut my teeth on the innovation stuff. Because I think that might be something useful for somebody out there, right? Like innovation is not just about creating a new product. It's about developing an existing product. How does that product grow and change? And so, yeah, so we got to implement a lot of, we got to like kind of refine our methodology, I think, on that project in terms of things like innovation governance, data-driven decision-making, that kind of thing. Recently, we worked with Guidewell to do some experiment design for them. And that was interesting because that was more of a pure innovation consulting project. So that was new to me, just kind of doing pure innovation consulting without the software side of things. But yeah, we designed some experiments for them, and some landing pages, some email campaigns, just to de-risk some new initiatives that they had come up with. And I worked on a lot of things that didn't really have an innovation component, but probably had more of an analyst component. IPD Analytics, that's another client that's been around for a long time, about 12 years. But I mean, I just came in recently on that to work on Salesforce, and transitioning them from custom code to kind of declarative no code flows. And that's an interesting point too, because I mean, that project kind of shows you how things are evolving. I mean, Salesforce itself is a platform that, you get a lot out of the box, and it's kind of like that's a no code solution. I remember a company that I worked with before, they kind of rolled their own CRM. That was a common thing to do, is to roll your own CRM. You have you start out with a spreadsheet, and, before long you have a kind of hack together solution with PHP. But Salesforce out of the box allows you to do a lot more than just CRM stuff, and that's kind of where I see things going. I mean, there's a lot of no code solutions out there. And then I worked for a number of smaller projects, so I mean, that's the fun thing about Informulate, is got a lot of different things going on. So a lot of smaller startups, a lot of different kinds of consulting, just email deliverability, that kind of thing, mobile apps. So it's been a broad set of projects that we've worked on.
Yeah, that's a great point, because that's where I think the difference between a developer who takes requirements and delivers stuff versus a solution architect or solution designer who then transitions into an innovation person who really has to have a mental model for understanding the whole business comes in, right? And I think part of what you've done really well, and we'll get into that in more detail here shortly, was really making sure that we're fine-tuning the technical effort to really solve the business problem. And talk a little bit about that. Like, what is the difference between working at Informulate and other places you worked at?
Yeah, I mean, Informulate is different than any other place I worked at, just because, I mean, we've got a lot of things that I think we do right. It's interesting coming from I worked at a few different places prior to Informulate that were radically different. And then I came to Informulate, which is also really different. I mean, I would think the things that make us different is, our focus on quality. I think, Rajiv, you said something once that's always stuck with me, is that, a client can tolerate an overage on the budget or the timeline, but nobody is going to tolerate low quality. And so, it's really the processes that we have to ensure that quality. And I think it's like, just agile methodology, we follow Scrum, that ensures that, that doesn't just ensure like, hey, the software is written well, like the code is free of bugs, but I think that ensures quality of engagement with the client. We're putting people first, and we're making sure they understand what we're working on, because we're demonstrating an increment of progress, every sprint cycle. But then I also think it's our dedication to process improvement. So, not every project has been a spectacular success here, but I think given the time, I mean, we just incrementally improve on things. Because and that goes back to agile methodology as well, because you're not just incrementally delivering a product, but you're incrementally improving the process. So you have a sprint review in which you demonstrate that increment of value, right, that you've delivered on. That's the product. But then you're also doing a sprint retrospective, which is say, hey, how are we working well together? And so that's another big thing I would say that's really different. We're serious about retrospectives. A lot of retrospectives happen. There's ad hoc retrospectives. There's scheduled retrospectives. There's internal retrospectives. There's external retrospectives. So a lot of looking back and saying, hey, how can we do better? And that might seem annoying, I guess, but it really does work. You kind of have to have a different mindset to work here. You got to have like kind of a growth mindset, like, hey, we're trying to get better all the time. And so that incremental process improvement, I think, is really what sets us apart. You know, it's been great learning about our frameworks that we have, you know, innovation governance, you know, data-driven decision-making, SAMI, EET. So all that stuff, I don't want to like read the stuff off our website here, but, you know, and I think, you know, one thing is like some companies, like, they have these silos, right? I remember when I was a developer, the dev team was really siloed, right? And the QA team was really siloed. And it was like the devs just threw stuff over the wall to QA, and QA would throw it back over to the devs. And it was kind of like, you know, and the IT department itself was a big silo, right? And so that can happen, but here I think we're really focused on the end result. You know, everybody's kind of working together, and we're not really just thinking, hey, let's write some code and ship it out and invoice the client. It's like, hey, are you guys actually building the right product? You know, is this actually going to deliver business value? And, you know, that benefits everybody, right? Because if we're building the wrong product for somebody, you know, it's not going to be successful, and therefore we're not going to be successful long term. So I think it's that long term approach as well that's really different. Like we're focused on the long term relationship with our clients. And that's different than a project approach where someone's coming in, knocking out a project, sending the invoice, moving on to the next one. So.
Yeah, I want to deep dive on two of those things that you mentioned. One, the retrospectives part, which you rightly called out. We do quite a few of those. But, you know, every place you go to, they're going to have, if something goes wrong, they're going to talk about, hey, what happened? Why did it go wrong? What do you think is the difference between retrospectives elsewhere and what you have here? And the second question is, how do you actually see that long term? Yes, we do have a few multiple long-term clients that have been with us for 5, 10, 12 years. But what enables you to be a tech lead on a project that builds that long-term relationship? So two-part question. One is retrospectives and the other is long-term.
Yeah, I hope I understand the question correctly, but just like, I guess you're right. Retrospectives can't, like, so at any other place you screw up, there's going to be a conversation about it. You know what I mean? You know, you crash the production database, you know, there's going to be you know, what happened, you know, how can we do it better? But, you know, I think the difference is the difference between like an Informulate culture of retrospectives and like what I've experienced elsewhere is that we're not just doing retrospectives when something, you know, catches on fire, right? I mean, that's important to do. I think everybody does that, right? It's like, you know, why did the server blow up? You know, why did the client have a bad experience? There's always going to be those conversations, but I think we're doing retrospectives, you know, just if it went well, we're doing a retrospective, right? Just to say, hey, this went really well. Like, how can we be intentional about, you know, like what about this can we make sure we replicate? You know, we're not just kind of assuming that, you know, that if everything goes well, we're doing a good job. Like, there's always something to improve. So I think that's a little bit. And does that answer the first part of your question? I'm not sure I understood it entirely.
No, you got it. That's one difference. And part of the retrospective process, you know, are just to share with the audience, we asked kind of the standard questions like what went right, what went wrong, what can we do different? And the key thing there is for us, as we have those conversations again and again, is obviously to make actual changes to the process. And, you know, you've been instrumental, and I wanted to give you credit for actually reorganizing our entire knowledge base. So that was the lead up for that, which was you actually took that on, and you actually made a big difference in kind of making the knowledge base something that's accessible and usable. So go ahead and, you know, share a little bit about how that came about, and you know, why you felt that the knowledge base was there, but wasn't, doing what it's supposed to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the knowledge base still needs a lot more work, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely miles away from where it was. I mean, I think every project has some kind of wiki or something. There's somewhere somebody's dumping notes somewhere, right? And it's not really organized. So, I think that's another tech lead responsibility, right? It's just like you gotta make sure you're keeping the knowledge organized. And I mentioned silos earlier. I think there's also silos in a development team. There's that one developer that knows where the bodies are buried, and nobody else knows. He knows where like all the things are. And so, part of a knowledge base is to facilitate knowledge transfer, but it's also to encode best practices, right? Like if you're not writing down your system, you don't have a system to improve. You know what I mean? And that's the whole point of doing a retrospective, is to systematically improve, the process. But I mean, if the process isn't written down, like where are you going to put, like, so let's say you do a retrospective. We think, hey, we can do this, this, and this better. Where are you writing that down at? It's in the document. That document's going to go away, right? So you have to have a process to come back and say, hey, you remember this retrospective we had, 3 weeks ago? Like, did we actually, you got to have action items, you got to have follow through. All that has to be a process that you do consistently. And it's kind of funny, right? Because we work in software, and software is all about like instructions. It's all about telling the computer what to do. But there's all this human process that has to be done consistently. And so that's where a knowledge base comes in. It really documents the process, and enables the team to kind of execute with consistency. And I think maybe one thing that's different from our knowledge base versus, some others that I've looked at, and ours is not like a shining example, but I think one thing that's different is we focus a lot on checklists. So, make it procedural, make it easy for someone to, check the boxes and just make sure. And there's a lot that can be said about just the value of checklists, but the more you can kind of distill knowledge, organizational knowledge, business process into kind of something that's executable, like easy to execute on, that's going to make it more successful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's exactly what I was wanting to showcase too, because I think the conversations you and I and some of the developers had with respect to not just building a knowledge base, because that's kind of a chore that nobody wants to do unless you see the value out of it. And we had a lot of content previously, which was very verbose and kind of descriptive and contextual. But I read the checklist manifesto, you and I had a conversation, and just converting everything to a point where, hey, at this point, at this event, here's your checklist of things that you need to do before going to production. Here's a checklist of things you need to do before doing a client demo. Here's a checklist of things you need to do as you gather requirements. And so I think just simplifying all of that down to where your checklist and knowledge base activity and consuming the knowledge base is like a 5-minute activity, right? So it shouldn't be too onerous, otherwise nobody would do it. So I think that was really powerful of what, we kind
maybe we should write a blog post on this to help people out, but just to give people listening an idea. Like the hardest part about like you're accumulating a bunch of documents is having a structure for it. And I don't know if this is the best structure, but it's the structure that we are using, and it's worked well, is to organize everything along the lines of a business structure, right? And so we've got knowledge. So obviously that starts out with development, because you have an agile process like Scrum. That's very there's events that happen, right? So if you can think about it in terms of like you're structuring according to the whole business as a whole. You've got marketing, you've got sales, you've got delivery of the value. That's development, right? That's actually delivering the value. And within that, you can structure that into like you've got the project start, you've got your sprints. Within the sprints, there's agile events that happen. So think about that in terms of, okay, you have the business structure, and then within the business structure you have events that happen. What do you do before the event? What do you do after the event? So it's kind of like, ideally in my head, if we could automate this, there'd be a computer that knows what everybody's doing, and before the project starts, it's pinging us with an email saying, hey, project start checklist, make sure you check that off. So that's the end goal. There's obviously a big gap, like how do we get that happening? But it's worked. The structure itself has worked well. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's worked for us. Cool. So you mentioned a number of projects, and that some were successful and others were not. So let's explore that a little bit. Like, what do you think is the real difference? Because there's some pretty scary statistics out there in terms of software projects that fail. And I think it's like 70% of software projects fail to hit their budget, timeline, quality, whatever requirements. So what's the real difference between building digital products versus building digital products that actually deliver business value and user engagement?
Yeah, that's a that's a great question. But just to touch on the point you mentioned is like, yeah, like the stats out there for failed software project is actually really surprising if you go look it up. Like a lot of software projects fail to deliver value, but then they also fail like project management wise. I mean, most of these projects are coming in like way over budget. And it's even worse if you start looking at government software projects. I mean, those things are just crazy. And then I think a related stat that's important is quality, but we can talk about that. But I mean, what the difference, your question was the difference between building just software and then building software that actually delivers business value. I feel like delivering a quality application is the easy part. And that's not to say it's easy, but of the two pieces, that's the easier part, is delivering a quality application. And I think nowadays, if you're following a methodology like we are, it kind of lays it out for you, like, hey, these methods are going to help you deliver quality. But I think the more important piece is like you can deliver a quality application to a client, and it can be the wrong solution. And when you work as a tech lead, you realize, hey, did we misunderstand the requirements, or did the client, so there can be miscommunications in the requirements process. But I think more importantly, above that, the client could just be building the wrong thing. Like how do you know that you're building the app that has the right features that the users actually are going to use and derive value from, and then they actually want to use? Like, is it easy to use? So I know there's a lot of pieces there, but I think that is the secret sauce. And so diving into the innovation methodology helps you to know those things with a high degree of certainty, because you're performing experiments to validate that the market conditions are there. Like people actually want this product. You're doing experiments to validate that the product you're delivering actually has the right set of features. And then you're also running, like, once the product's out there, you can do a lot of cool stuff to determine, hey, like you can do A/B tests on, like, hey, do users prefer this layout or this layout? You can do just like live usability tests, like hallway usability tests, to say, hey, how does someone look at this app and use it initially? So all those things can help us. That's like the secret sauce, in my opinion, to a successful project. And it's one of the ways you can ensure, hey, we're building not just a software, we're building the right software project. So I think just a few takeaways there. Start with like a simple. Go ahead.
Sorry, Jared, go ahead.
I was just going to say a few takeaways is like, start with a single value proposition. Start simple, use off the shelf tools where possible, and focus on validating it, right? You want to have a working solution as fast as possible, right? That you can validate. You can say, hey, yes, no, the users like this or they don't like this. You don't want to spend 6 months building something and realize, oh, this is a little off base a little bit. So, Agile can help with that because it's delivering highest. So the thing that we focus on with our Agile process, we kind of categorize all the features, all the stories in a sprint or in a project according to business value. Highest business value first, or highest risk first. Those are kind of equivalent ways of looking at it. Start with a single value proposition and deliver that first, deliver that highest value first, and then test it. Get user feedback as early as you can. And then that way you can be certain, hey, and if it's a total failure, if like users hate it, it's like, hey, you've only wasted a sprint. You can go back and kind of build on top of that. I know that was a lot of words. Hopefully that made sense.
You nailed it. So basically, you and I know this, but our audience probably doesn't, is that, Informulate, our Bible is the lean startup book in terms of how we approach innovation. But then since that, apart from that, we've developed some of our own frameworks on top of that to kind of niche it down to specific verticals, not verticals, more like the size of the company and new product development versus existing product development, that kind of thing.
Perfect.
But you've also done certification on that front, right? You got an innovation accounting certificate recently?
Um, wasn't innovation accounting. It was, shout out to Chromatic. I took some courses, some innovation courses there on running better experiments. And that actually has been, I thought I had a lot. I thought I knew a lot just from working with you, and I did have a lot of hands-on experience. But I mean, it really helped me. It really kind of broadened just the repertoire of experiments, right? And not just like giving you more experiments to run, like here's some options, but it's helping you categorize the questions that you can ask about your business model. It like, is your question um, quantitative versus qualitative, right? That's an easy one. We've done different kinds of experiments that were qualitative, like we're doing customer interviews. Is it a generative experiment or an evaluative experiment? In other words, a lot of experiments, they can generate a lot of different answers, and that's the purpose of them. Versus an evaluative experiment is like, we're just trying to validate like this one thing, like how much will users pay for this product? That's an evaluative experiment. Like, what is our users' problems? That's a generative experiment, in other words. So I mean, not that's I mean, that's just something I learned recently there. And then categorizing the question too, is it a problem or a solution? So that has been really helpful for me. Just that additional training. So it's funny. I love it when you realize how much you don't know about something. So I'm thinking, oh man, me and Rajiv have been killing this innovation game here. And then you meet the pros, right? And you're like, oh, I'm still minor leagues.
Yeah, no, Tristan Kromer is amazing. He actually was one of the first speakers I pulled when for Lean Startup Orlando when I was trying to get like legit speakers to speak at that.
Oh yeah.
It was like 7, 8 years ago. And then since then he crowdsourced the book, The Real Startup Book, which also has been a great inspiration to me. And if you're looking
Yeah.
for the audience, right? If you're looking for a list of when to do what experiment, The Real Startup Book by Tristan Kromer is a great one. Tristan, if you're listening, great job on that. Longtime fan, and we've talked a few times, but there's some really great content that's being crowdsourced as well, apart from some of the great content coming from agencies like Strategizer and others. But yeah, check out that book, The Real Startup Book, if anybody is interested. But yeah, so Jared, let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. Let's dive into innovation now. How do you go about validating that a product will actually deliver? Like how much is it possible to know beforehand, and how do you test it?
So I mean, I think it really comes down to like, you want to know. I mean, it depends on if you're trying to build a new product or you have an existing product. Um, I think most of my experience has been with existing products. Like someone already has an idea, they already have a business. I mean, that's who we're working with most of the time. So let me just stick with that. But I think you want to start out. You want to have an end goal. Like so with the university wellness program, we had derived from leaders that the two top things that we were to focus on, like the two drivers, the numbers that we wanted to move, were internal efficiency and increasing user engagement, right? So they wanted engagement in two ways, right? Not just more people on the platform, but they wanted users to engage deeper on the platform, and really drive those kind of health outcomes that they were looking for. So I mean, so with that in mind, you want to start with like, hey, these are our objectives. So we want to kind of reduce the administrative burden. We want to increase engagement. Like, what do you do there? What do you do from there? Like, how do you know what feature to work on next? I mean, you can guess, you can kind of, and I think a lot of people have intuition on what they think would be valuable just from talking to people and using the product. They have a list of annoyances that they use the product. But really what it comes down to is you don't want to just kind of make decisions based on intuition or based on kind of a vote by committee. You want to do data-driven decision making. Just make decisions based on concrete. That basically take that intuition, and that this is the lean startup methodology. Take that business intuition and turn that into validated knowledge.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Actually, it's a great example of kind of when we engage with our clients, there's almost like two different, completely independent offerings, but that are so closely married together. You're almost like the client, for them, it's almost inseparable. But from our perspective, we have to put on one hat or the other. And in this example that you just gave, it's a large university. They have 18,000 employees that are using this platform. There's a whole set of technical considerations, right? There's like, you need to have high security, it's HIPAA compliant. There's health and wellness data in there. It needs to be really high performance, because there's a lot of people, and a lot of them come in the first week to do the program. And of course, there's extensibility and maintainability, because we've been working with them for 10 plus years. So all these technical considerations. And then of course there's quality, because you can't have poor quality, because that will impact the client experience and they might not want to come back. There's usability, and there's all these technical considerations. And then what you just mentioned, the data-driven decision making, it seems almost, it is blended, but it's almost a separate thing, because we had to go do actual consulting to figure that out, right? So dive into that for me for a little bit, right? We had to obviously gain credibility by doing the basics really well in order to be invited to the conversation about data-driven decision making. So once we got there, what happened?
Well, I guess, I mean, we kind of term this innovation governance, but I mean, I think where this works best. So where this kind of sub methodology works best is like, if you have a large application that has a lot of stakeholders, so a lot of people giving you input, right? And so inevitably what's going to happen in that situation is you're going to have two people that kind of have, I want feature X, I want feature Y, or, you know, we need to go in this direction, we need to go in this direction. So there might be some conflicts. There might be some conflicts of interest. There might be, you know, just kind of conflicting features, conflicting directions. And so one approach is to write all that down and just let them hash it out. But a better approach is to say, hey, let's actually use data to drive the decision. So you have feature X, you got to say, hey, why is feature X, like what about feature X is going to improve, you know, the two drivers, engagement or efficiency, you know? And then how are we going to know that? So that's another great question that you have to ask, is like, when we build feature X, how are we going to know that it improved either one of those two numbers, depending on what the feature was, right? And so you have to actually come up with your metrics, your criteria that you're going to measure before you build the feature. And, you know, usually, and this is within the context of an existing product, usually you can go out and measure that. You probably have the data. It's in Google Analytics. It's in the database. You know, you can see kind of how many users are on the platform and their flow through the application. So a lot of times that question was easy to answer. And other times it wasn't. Other times it's like, you know, how many people are opening these emails? Okay, we have to go build, you know, some custom email analytics here to figure out, you know, what emails are driving people through the program. So, you know, sometimes you have to actually build the infrastructure to do the measurement. But that's valuable. I mean, just building that out, now you can make more data-driven decisions around those features, right? Because you're coming up with a question, you're saying, how can we measure it? How are we going to know it's successful? And then the great thing about that is you build the feature and you can tell, hey, did it make an impact or not? It's black or white. Whereas if you didn't do that, it's very subjective, and you have multiple stakeholders, and it's just like, you know, it's like an argument without any kind of, you know, it's like, who has the best argument? You know, who's the smooth talker here? You know, it's kind of like that's what it is.
The HIPPO principle, the highest paid person's opinion.
Yeah, HIPPO. Yeah, okay. That's basically, yeah, no, and that's true, Rajiv. That's kind of what it boils down to. It's like in any kind of argument, it's like, who has the final word? It's like, you know, the boss comes in and says, we're gonna go do it this way.
Perfect. No, that was a great summation of that. So we know that the process of taking down requirements and building products is one thing, but how those requirements come into being is really what you're talking about in terms of innovation, like which path you pick, because there's an infinite number of paths you could go down, and filtering those choices down to what's actually going to make a difference from a point of view of an innovation theme, which is the two things that you mentioned in this case was user engagement and internal efficiency. That helps to filter down the universe of choices down to things that you actually want to do.
Right.
Now, once you've decided that, what are you actually going to do for experimentation, right? When, and there's a lot of tools out there, right? When should you use what, I guess is the question. Like, are there some operational limits, or should you depend on third-party tools, or should you do custom? Like, kind of paint the picture a little bit now. Once you decide to do experimentation, what do you do next?
Yeah, again, this is different, new product versus existing product. Let me just say, like, for new products, like, there's never been a better time for easy prototypes, no code solutions. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth repeating. It's like, get something out into the market as soon as you can. You want to get feedback as soon as you can. You don't want to spend a lot of time designing, building, and then not getting feedback. Like, make a landing page and see and pitch your product and see how many signups you get. That's going to validate your market. Build a prototype. Use Google Sheets, use Google Forms, to collect information from people, to do surveys. Bubble.io. I mean, you can build Bubble.io. That's a new platform. I'm hoping to get a little bit more experience with it. But I mean, you can build a whole mobile application in there, just drag and drop, and it can do some fancy stuff without writing any kind of code. And then there's always been, like, it's easy for someone nowadays to go and build a landing page. It's easy I mean, you can spin up WordPress, and now you have drag and drop, editors like Elementor, there's Squarespace, there's Shopify. You want to sell a physical product, you want to sell t-shirts, you can spin that up. So, I mean, there's never been a better time for no code solutions and to validate your idea. And I would say that's the first step. So for a new product development, you want to, you want to get a prototype out there as soon as possible. And then you can think about if that turns into a success, if it's like, hey, this validates my business idea, well, maybe that prototype's not scalable. So that's kind of turns into, that's the pros of custom software. So, you have a prototype, it's not going to scale, you're not going to be able to scale your users on it. It's going to be slow. There's going to be limitations. That's when you want to go full custom. So I don't really see, low code, no code, and custom software as kind of like opposing each other. Like, you got to pick one. It's like they complement one another, especially when you think about innovation methodology, because you're going to start out with something that's easy to build, prototype, just to get the feedback. And that's going to make sure when you actually have to go spend the money, hire developers to do the custom software, you're going to build the right product. So that's what I would say is important. But the custom software is going to solve the problem in the best way. There's going to be fewer limitations on how the solution works. You're going to get full control over the user experience. And then most importantly, it's going to be scalable. It's going to be expandable. And then you own the intellectual property. I mean, you've just encoded a business, and that's valuable. Like, you've taken a business, put it into some code, and the business system and the process is not just in your head. It's there in the application. So, and then I would say for an existing product. So let's talk about existing product. You've probably got a lot of code, but I mean, there's definitely when you want to use third-party tools, right? You want to use free stuff. Google Analytics, that's free. That can tell you a lot about who's coming to your application. You can set custom conversion points. You can do a lot of tracking. Like, the more data you have, the better you're going to be able to make intelligent decisions about what to do next. So, you can use third-party tools, like I mentioned, Google Analytics. You can use paid tools, to do A/B testing and that kind of thing. So that's kind of how you definitely want to implement a lot of third-party stuff. And I have a big list somewhere that I just go and look at and say, hey, can we use this tool for this situation? But yeah, you want to use these third-party tools to get as much data as possible about how users are using your application, what they're looking at, what the roadblocks are, that kind of thing.
Cool. That's perfect. Thanks, Jared. Looks like we have a few more minutes. So I'm going to ask, this was very, very helpful. Deep dive into experimentation, kind of knowing how the rubber actually meets the road is important. But let me ask you a couple of personal questions. What gets you up in the morning? What motivates you to work on innovation, and kind of what versus what has been a traditional software development role? A lot of software developers kind of stay in that role more or less, but you wanted to go towards innovation, and you seem pretty motivated to get there. So how did that happen?
Well, two questions. What gets me up in the morning is insomnia. I'm not sure I actually sleep anymore. I've got kids, and once you and I'm a middle-aged man now. Once you get into middle age, have kids, it's like the sleep is scarce. But what motivates me, I think I might have mentioned this earlier, specifically about innovation versus a more traditionally a software development role, is really I became interested in how businesses work, and I'm really interested in business now. Because I mean that's kind of what innovation methodology is. And I think honestly, I think if you read the Lean Startup, it really simplifies things, because a lot of people, when you say the word business, you think like, businessman in a suit, board meetings, you think, office space kind of situation. But I mean, business is all about innovation. That's the core of a business, right? You're creating value where there was no value. If you can figure out what people want and need, that's crazy that's even possible. That you could develop a solution that millions of people use, get and make money on that. So really, I'm really interested in businesses, and I think innovation methodology just kind of simplifies how a business should operate, or how you basically would go about starting a business. A lot of people think the first step to starting a business is go to the bank and get a loan, or I guess worse, have a business plan. And business model canvas, that's something we use a lot. Like that's great in itself. And that kind of came out of, I don't know exactly where that originated from, but that came out of this whole community of lean startup practitioners. And so there's a lot of,
yeah, specifically Strategizer came up with that one.
Yeah, Strategizer. And we use a lot of Strategizer tools. And then that's great for just deconstructing a business and seeing the different parts of it and working on the different parts of it. And so, that kind of is what motivates me. And I guess, Rajiv, you mentioned this earlier, just that's kind of my orientation. Is I'm always trying to look at like, what's the next level? What am I aiming at? And so, I started out, I liked software. I wanted to learn about software development. I wanted to learn how computers work. I wanted to build software, and I'm happy doing that. I still enjoy it. I got to jump into some code the other day and I'm like, this is fun. I miss this. I don't do this enough. But I'm always looking at the next level. So next level up from, actually being an individual contributor is, tech lead. Next level up from that is kind of higher level, like more managing multiple projects, that kind of thing. Next level up from that is like the business, working on other people's business. So, I mean, that's the great thing about Informulate, is we get exposed not just to a bunch of different software projects, but a bunch of different businesses. The thing that drives the software project is the business. You're building a piece of software for a business. And, the business is solving the customer's needs. So if you can, that's the thing, right? Is if you can connect the line, if you can draw a straight line, maybe it's not a straight line, but you can draw a line between the software you're writing all the way to the customer that business is serving. That's the best thing you can do, because that's gonna make it obvious, like, hey, you're delivering value or not. So anyway, that's kind of the source of my motivation, is just that interest in how things work, how it all connects.
That's great. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I definitely agree with all of that you just mentioned. It's a passion of mine too, is to understand kind of, I think business is for me the part that's most interesting of entrepreneurship, in, I would say, more than business, is it gets you closer to reality, because you understand things at a higher level, and a bigger picture understanding of how value is created in the market. So, but anyway, I think we're almost out of time. We have time for one more question, if I may. So you've talked about your growth journey, and you've talked about, overseeing some of the team members in Informulate. So we're always hiring. So what would you say, if you were talking to folks that are interested in being a part of Informulate, what would you say is a reason for them to join your team?
Well, I came to Informulate just because I wanted I wanted to work remote, and, I wanted to do development with you guys, because it seemed like a good place. But I stayed here for the growth. I mean, that's why I'm still here today. And I think you really have to have that orientation to really excel at Informulate. So this is the place to grow, and we're intentional about it. So not even like, hey, do a better job on your projects, but even, we have quarterly growth roadmaps for people. And so we're very intentional. We realize, like, Informulate might not be your long-term destination. I mean, you might not stay with us for 10 years, but you might be here for 3 years. And in that 3 years, like, hey, like, what do you want to accomplish for your career, for your life personally while you're here? And so, we take that seriously. We hold each other accountable to our goals. And I would say it's harder for sure. Like, this is not like the easiest place I've worked at. It's harder, definitely, but there's a lot of growth there. One reason why you might want to come here is you're going to get to be exposed to a lot of different kind of things, a lot of wide variety of problems, a lot of different businesses, a lot of technologies. So I've worked on more variety of technologies than any other time in my life. Like, every month, it's like something that something I don't know, and I got to go learn how to do it. Learn about some new technology, and I'm interested in technology. So you definitely have an interest in technology, but I think most people want to work for a software startup or a software company do. So a lot of opportunities to do different things, wide exposure. So I think that's it: growth and variety.
Well said. All right. Well, that's about all the time we have today, Jared. We could keep talking for a long time, but thanks again for sparing a few minutes, and especially for your fantastic contributions to Informulate over the past few years, and especially for getting real results for our clients. So thanks again for making a few minutes.
Thanks, Rajiv. My pleasure.
Cool.